Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a fire Alchemist-inspired boom bap type beat from scratch, covering everything from gritty samples to neck-breaking drums and everything else in between. And make sure you stick around because I'm also going to share 5 game-changing tips from the Alchemist himself that I learned from taking his masterclass course. Let's dive straight into it. So when you're starting with a blank canvas for a boom bap beat, you can go either way and start with the melody or the drums. Now, of course, the Alchemist is a master sample digger, so we're going to start with a sample, something cinematic. So I'm going to go into my old movies kits from Reddit, and you've got some really good chops and random samples from classic movies, really old. Now, when it comes to flipping a sample, there are so many different ways you can do it. The more you do it, the more you'll pick up your own style. My go-to method is always to start off detuning the sample, turning the pitch down, because I like my beats to be a lot darker, a lot lower in pitch. And then all I'm going to do is chop out the beginning of that and just use that, because I think if we just loop that and manipulate it even more, we'll have the perfect foundation. Now keep in mind, I'm working at 160 beats per minute, which is just 80 BPM. Anything between 70 all the way up to 95 is usually perfect for this sort of music. Now we'll just put some halftime on it. Again, this is just part of my process of flipping a sample, is trying a few different plugins, seeing how they come out, and then figuring it out from there. Now, if we just EQ out the lows, which we're going to do everything below 100 hertz or so, because we have to keep in mind that the kick and the bass is going to be taking up all that low end. Maybe some of the highs as well. We want to keep some of that noise and texture in, everything between like 7 and 10K. So I think that works perfectly. And then what I like to do to make sure that it's not too monotonous in terms of the sample is duplicate it. We'll change this to yellow, and then I like to pitch that up an octave so that the melody is constantly just jumping an octave. And I think that just gives you a lot more variation when it comes to the arrangement. We'll just highlight that and we'll go +6. And it's as simple as that. We've now got the foundation to do anything we want on top of that. So we'll add a few more effects to that layer just to see if we can get it even more like trippy and a bit weird. I've been digging these free baby audio plugins lately. Let's try a few of these. And make sure you watch my last video on free plugins where I go over some of these baby audio ones among some other really good free plugins. You can click it, link up there. So we've got pitch drift. And then let's try some magic dice as well. We can usually get something pretty cool from that. I don't know what the magic dice is doing, to be honest, but it just sounds cool, and that's all I'm going for, is just something that sounds cool and weird and would be like a nice sort of bed of texture to put everything else on top of. Now you can see I'm also just doing some little fade outs between the clips just to make sure that there's none of that annoying sound when it transitions between. Now, when it comes to mixing, I like to mix as I go along, at least the broad strokes in terms of the EQ, the panning, the effects, and even delay and compression a lot of the times. So for this layer, I'm just going to pan it a little bit to the left, not too far, and we'll just turn it down a bit and put a little bit of reverb from the send. Next, I'm going to add a piano stab. Now, this is a sound that you would have heard in hundreds of boom bap tracks if you listen to this genre. I remember one of the first ever hip hop songs I heard with this was Deep Cover by Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. Now, of course, you can do a piano stab yourself. You just have to figure out the right notes depending on the key of your track. In this case, I've got a good piano stab from a Alchemist drum kit that I've got. Anytime you're making a boom bap beat, if you put in that sound, it will always sound good, especially when you're trying to do a really dark, ominous, like Griselda sort of type of vibe. So all we have to do is just make it fit in terms of the location and the key of the sample. Usually the placement works best when it's layered with a snare, I think. And again, if you want to mess with variation, you could just have it going up an octave the second time. So we'll see how that sounds. And again, with the EQ, we'll take out a lot of the lows here. So now we've got this. So the idea is just to keep filling out the soundscape. We've got something panned left, right. We've got something in the higher frequencies with that piano stab, but then also we've got variation. So both the samples are constantly evolving, not just having the same pitch all the time. So to me, that's the main idea of the melody. Now we want to add a lot of ear candy, phrases and accents. And these can be anything like more random stabs, random weird sound effects, even vocals, whatever. I'll quickly mention that one of my favorite places to find sounds and samples in general from is the Liminal Music Library. Now I do have an affiliate link with them. I'll put it in the description where you can get a decent discount if you use my code. They've got some really good sample packs. I've been loving their sounds in all of my beats on my Type Beat channel recently. So in this case, I'm just going to go through the sounds and find something I could take a little piece from. So we've got this bell stem layer. I don't need all of it. I'm just going to take literally the first notes. And of course I could have just dragged in a VST or an actual bell one shot, but I like to use stems like this a lot of the time because they're going to be sort of detuned or have texture in them, which makes it a lot easier to mesh together all these random textures and make, again, a soundscape for a boom bap beat. We'll just EQ out everything sort of below 900 hertz or so. Ton of reverb on there, even some delay as well, both from the sends. And then we just hear it all together and see how we have to change the pitch. A lot of these sounds don't really need to be heard in the actual mix when you're listening to the beat. It's just about adding a bit of flavor to the soup. So this sound is actually a good example of what I mean. It's obviously just a really simple one shot, but it's got this texture to it and you can tell it's detuned as well. So just putting stuff like that in very specific places within the loop will work really well. For the next accent sort of sound, I really want to put in like a chimey sort of bell. I think chimes always work really well on boom bap, and especially Alchemist beats. He likes to throw this in, especially in his more sort of down tempo and darker beats like Skinny Shug, for example. So we're just going to put on some Valhalla Supermassive Delay, which is my favorite delay, especially for more like crazier delays. And again, like the other sounds, just having that come in every now and then. It could be at the beginning of a verse or something like that. Now the final melodic sound that I want to put in somehow is some strings, and again I'm going to get this from a stem or a sample so that it's already got that texture and process into it. We could of course just throw in our own string sound, hold down a note and you're good to go, but I want to make sure that we're just putting together all these different flavors like I keep mentioning. So again, from the Liminal Music Library kit, this is phrases and arrangements, which you can check out on their website. Again, we're EQing out quite a bit, ton of reverb, low in the mix, and we'll just pan this one, let's say, a bit to the right. Okay, so now we've got this nice 8-bar loop that's got a lot of texture, a lot of random sounds. It gives us a lot of variation when it comes to the arrangement. So we're going to have a lot of options. And now we can move on to the bass. Now when it comes to the bass, I like to keep it relatively simple. If the main sample we had used had been a lot more basic with less movement, then perhaps with the bass line, you could be a little bit more complex, have a lot more notes. But in this case, you just want to sort of complement everything. In terms of sound selection, I personally find that one shots for bass guitars work the best. I think they just sound better than using like Analog Lab or even a VST like Ample Bass. I just think the one shots have something to them, especially if they're once again already processed. So this is my go-to bass sound, which is again from that Alchemist kit, link in the description. Now, when you're working with samples and maybe you don't know what the key is, it can be a little bit annoying sometimes trying to work it out, but I think it just comes down to experience. So in this case, I know that what sounds right is going to be starting off at the C. But then to make it a little bit more interesting as well as dark, we're going to go up to the C sharp. Now this one semitone movement is always like an easy trick for making anything sound dark, whatever the instrument is. Let's just record it in. So like I said, really simple. It's just about sitting underneath all the melodic stuff and just complementing it. Now, just in terms of the mixing aspect for the bass, I like to do that towards the end because you have to make sure it works well with the drums. But all I tend to do is just turn the bass to mono, turn it a little bit lower in the mix, and then come back to that once we get towards the end of the beat. So before we move on to the drums, I just want to quickly share with you some of the tips that I learned from doing the Alchemist Boom Bap Masterclass, which I found really, really helpful. As a huge Alchemist fan, it was really interesting just to see some more in-depth stuff on his specific style of production. So first of all, if there's a sample that you find that you really, really like, whether you found it digging yourself on YouTube or it's from a famous song that you actually like, the best thing to do is dig into who's made that sample. So if it's from an old song from the 60s, go and listen to that band or the producer or even the actual person playing that instrument and listen to other stuff they've done, because more than likely you'll find more samples that be perfect for your style. Secondly, I mentioned this earlier, but you can take one sample and flip it in hundreds of different ways. There are so many different techniques to sampling, to processing samples. You need to figure out what works for you in terms of workflow and also sounds good to your own ear. Everyone's ear is different. It makes you just experiment figuring out your own style of sampling. The next thing, which is very obvious in a lot of the music from the Alchemist, is letting the sample breathe. A lot of the time the sample has a lot going on, or it's already just perfect. It's already cooked to the perfect temperature and you don't really need to do much to it. So you should let it breathe and just let the natural artistry of that original sample come out by itself without you needing to add anything. Next up, another sort of obvious one, but you can take any bit of noise from anything and turn it into something really good and creative. It's just about how inspired you are. You can literally sample cars driving on the street, your friend talking to you, and turn it into anything. You just have to be creative, try different things, experiment, and see what works. Finally, if you're making beats for artists like most of us are, you need to remember that the artist is going to be on it and keep that in mind as you're making the beat. Now, when it comes to arrangement, a lot of the time people can get locked into doing intro, verse, chorus, bridge, outro, and it can get a little bit stale and it can also become very formulaic for you as the beat maker. So something that the Alchemist mentioned is thinking of it as you're sort of driving and giving directions and road signs to the artist. You don't need to make a very structured layout and sort of ABA formula to it. You can just put some little indications that this is a different part of the beat and let them figure out their own arrangement. So if you've got things like a vague direction, whether it's a little drop out of the beat or the sample suddenly filters down, that just gives these little indications to the artist that they can do different things there. Now let's get back into the drums. Now when it comes to the drums on Boom Bap, you've got a few ways to go. Of course, sampling a break is the tried and tested method. You can get breaks from everywhere, Reddit, Splice. I'll mention again, Liminal Music Library has some amazing packs and they've got some amazing breaks in there as well. Stuff like this. So the good thing with breaks is that they already have that perfect boom bap vibe. You don't really need to do much to them, but you can also chop them up, take the individual hits, even just take the groove from it and apply it to your own drum rack. So if we take this break, for example, which is again from the Alchemist kit. To me, this is the perfect boom bap break because it has a couple of things. Now, to explain this, I'm just going to put this into a MIDI track and we've got it chopped up into quarter notes by beat, and we can now play the individual hits. Firstly, we got this kick. It's a big booming thumpy kick, but it's good to have another kick that's a bit lighter, almost as a ghost note. So we've got this one here. So just after that hi-hat, you can hear it's a softer kick. Then we've got our main big hi-hat. So you can see that hi-hat softer, and then this one is heavier. And then of course we've got a good snare, a big fat drum kit snare. Now, there are a lot of basic boom bap drum patterns that you would have heard in all sorts of different beats. I'll quickly show you some of the standard ones that you would have heard, and that can always work depending on the sample that you got going. And then you can start experimenting with kicks being in different places and adding more kicks and more snares. So you can see it's pretty simple. If you get a good kick, a good hat, a good snare, you can just have fun for days with different variations. Now, my favorite go-to boom bap drum pattern is always going to be the same one, and it's based upon the break I've already showed you, and it's because of this very simple thing that happens. So I'll quickly show you on the pads. So of course, this drum break is already chopped up. If we just play it as it's meant to be, you'll hear exactly what I'm talking about. So if you hear that, so if we just did one of them, it would still sound really good. So it's just that one ghost note that adds all that swing and makes your neck break when you're nodding along to it. But when you put two of them together, suddenly you just get this insane bounce that just always sounds good in these beats. So now if we play it with the beat, so it's important to implement ghost notes, whether it's from a kick, which is usually the best one, I think, but even a hat and the snare can make all the difference. It just adds that little bit of swing to it that you need to get your head bouncing. So if we wanted to try and do that manually, you can see here, we'll put in this little drum rack with a few sounds. So you can use ghost notes by just putting a softer kick or a softer snare. And then you can also, of course, change the swing. In Ableton, it's pretty simple. You just use like a MPC swing preset. Obviously, we played this in live and you can see here this kick and then that kick. Because they're off grid, that's what's adding the swing. So let's try quantizing it and see what difference that makes. So you can hear that those kicks being on grid now just takes away from the effectiveness of this drum pattern. So let's say if we were just to drag them both like that. Those two subtle adjustments changed the whole thing. So it's important to experiment with positioning of these drum sounds. The Alchemist mentioned it again in his masterclass. He doesn't care about quantization and the grid. He ignores it completely, and to him it's about the feel and the swing. So that's the key concept when it comes to drums. If you're going to do it manually, just think about off-grid, swing, ghost notes, and you're going to be good to go. Otherwise, just use a break or chop up a break like I like to do. So in this case, we'll just put in this drum break that we've got from the Alchemist kit because it is literally the one that I want for this. To be even more effective and especially make it your own, you can layer drum sounds with the break. So when the snare hits, perhaps you want to clap or a rim shot, or even layering non-drum sounds like more perk sounds, effect sounds, random textures that can really make it interesting. So let's find, like, for example, this Foley sound. Okay, actually, let's take out that last bit. Put some delay, some reverb. So So that's the easy way just to make the drums more interesting while still adding texture and increasing that sort of bed of sound for the artist to be on top of. The last thing I like to do is usually a perk layer. And for this, you can just use like a percussive loop, a little bit of auto pan. In this case, we've got this one here. Again, quite subtle, but with the auto pan, I think it just works in conjunction with everything else. Now let's move on to the mixing, which should be relatively easy as we've been doing a lot of it as we go along. And that's the point, is that you don't have to do too much at the end. What I like to do is first a bit of group processing on everything in terms of the melody. For Boom Bap, RC20 is essentially a must-have. You can just mess about with it essentially to get gritty, dusty vinyl sound. Generally, you shouldn't need to do too much EQing on the melody group because we've been doing it on the individual layers. Just a little bit after the RC20 is always a good idea though. So you can see there that 50 Hertz, I don't want that. So I'm just literally going to remove everything below around 100. And if there are any frequencies like from that piano stab that are peaking out, you can just manually do something to it. Besides that, the only thing I like to do are effects that help with the arrangement, and that's usually something like Origin. I find is really good if you turn all the settings down and then you just automate this knob. Cymatics Origin is a free plugin that you can get, a sort of free version of RC20, but I like to use it specifically just for this. When it comes to the bass, I don't really do a lot of side chaining. I just don't like doing side chaining a lot of the time, unless I'm doing like trap music and I'm using an 808. We'll go to the break, and a lot of the time I'll just use Pro Q3 for this, because then you can put one on the bass layer and you can put one on the break, and you can actually overlay what's going on. Remove that from here, increase that on this one, and then you go to the break, do the same thing, overlay. And that's generally the extent of what I would do with the bass. When it comes to the drums, RC20 is usually a good shout because you can do quite a bit with it in terms of like getting them really messy and distorted. So you can get a lot of extra oomph just from doing that alone, to be honest. I don't really bother doing too much compression on the drums unless I've got a lot of individual layers. But if I'm using a break, honestly, a lot of the time I'm keeping it quite bare. The last thing in terms of the mix really is on the master channel. I'm going to put a saturator, soft clip, and then either analog clip or soft sine, and just mess around with the drive. And that's essentially everything that you need. For the arrangement, all you have to do is just copy this all out. Just find some little sections where you can say, all right, the drums will drop out there, no drums here. And then we'll have a section where the piano stab doesn't play. We'll have a section where the sample doesn't play. And that's literally it. You just go along. If you want to make it even easier to do the arrangement, just drag in an acapella. So I've got this Freddie Gibbs acapella that I tend to use a lot because I'm a big fan of Freddie Gibbs. As you're arranging to the acapella, it gets really easy to figure out the arrangement in terms of where you should drop out the drums because of a punchline, where the chorus is coming in, just where the natural places are through a bit of trial and error. And then from there, you'll be good to go with the perfect arrangement.
Take that walk, you know what I mean? Slam it. When I hit you up, I'm talking about banging something. Chill off in your crib and have a thing, probably make a sting or something. Girl, you like my bottom bitch. Post my bill, pay for my lawyer. Play your position when the mother hoes get out of order. When you wanna give me that pussy, you purchase a plane ticket. We're around town when I bust her down, then we shit like them lames did it. Got a dick with my dick's mirror lipstick. Basically, if this bitch lay with me, she paying me. I'm on some pimp shit for real. This 2 a.m. club was about to close up. Thumbing through my contacts, about like I married you that night up in the Marriott. Scream like you got your cherry pop. Drunk and switching up position. Thought this shit would never stop. Motherfucker intermission. Damn. Here we go again, baby. Gotta take that walk now.
Let me know in the comments if you've got any of your own tips and tricks that you want to share. And if you're in need of some free plugins, check out my last video where I'll go into some really good new free plugins for 2025. Otherwise, have a good one. Peace out.